My name is Dan Maguire, and I'm professor of ethics at Marquette University. I've been teaching ethics all my life. And I've put together what I've been calling a kind of summa ethica, a summary of the entire field of ethics, and a book that gives a method for how to do it. My criticism of most ethics books is they touch on bits of ethics here and there, but they never tell you the whole thing. Now, I got great help for this when I first started teaching many years ago. I was in Washington, D.C. at the Catholic University at the time, and I remember a student, I still remember her name, Mary Paula Walsh. And after a couple of months in the course, she came up to me and said, you know, I kind of like your conclusions and I like what you're doing, but I really have no idea how you're getting there. And that was really a keystone for my life as an ethicist. I realized our contribution, everybody's doing ethics. To be born, as Nietzsche says, is to be born a valuing animal. That's what you do. You're valuing. We're asking questions. Right from toddlerhood, we're into the business of ethics. What's good, what's bad, what's nasty, what's mean, what's nice. We're doing it all the time, but we don't have a method. And many ethics books don't give us a method. So I wrote this book to make sure there would be a method, because I say an ethics teacher is a Methodist, not in the sense of a religious group called Methodism, but your special expertise, what you bring or don't bring, is method, so that people can pursue the subject. And I have two key words when it comes to teaching ethics. And those two key words are architectonic and stories. Architectonic. What I found as a teacher, that if you build a little structure, a little graph, a little model, even a little formula at times, students can hang on it. And all the stuff that you're pouring in, if it fits onto that model, they can integrate it. So the model, that's what I mean by the architectonic approach to teaching. For that reason, I developed a wheel of ethics. It started out as a square and a trapezoid, and eventually realized, no, it had to be a wheel. And in that wheel, I encapsulate everything that's involved in the process of ethics. The hub of the wheel asks all the questions, the hunting and gathering phase of ethics. And the 9 spokes say the incredibly numbered different ways that we come to moral truth. Not just by reasoning, not just by principles, also sometimes in the comedic moment, sometimes only with tragedy. But all of those things are ways in which we come to moral truth. So I built that into a wheel model, and I find that very useful. Students can handle that. And when we have discussions in class and there's a lot of difference of opinion, I just start drawing the wheel model on there and point to parts of it that they're not thinking about, and it works. The second thing I do is, for example, treating justice. If you talk about justice, if you look in a book like Giorgio Del Vecchio's rather encyclopedic book on ethics, you'll find on justice, there are over 50 kinds of justice that are out there. Well, I give you a model on page 56 of ethics that really says they're all reducible to 3. There's commutative justice between individuals. There's social justice, what individuals owe to the common good. And thirdly, there is distributive justice, how all the goods of the commonwealth get handled back down to individuals. That's the entire rhythm of justice, and I wrap it up on a triangle model. Another key category in ethics is, of course, power. We use that word loosely. When President Johnson said, I have more power than any man in the history of the world, but I can't use it, he was only talking about kill power. And he himself had so many other forms of power. So I have, on page 88 of the ethics book, I have a power graph, and I show that there are multiple forms of power, ranging from violent to nonviolent. It's very useful for students to just start them with a couple of them. Some are violent, some are nonviolent, most are swing. They can go either way. They can be violent or they can be nonviolent. And then I started with a few, just sort of get the thing going. Students start filling it in. And sometimes they come up, believe it or not, I never thought of that one. That'll have to go on the next edition of the chart. I also use a model for talking about principles are a big part of ethics. Principles are wonderful generalizations about what's good, what's not so good. But the problem is they don't always hold. And there are exceptions to them. And ultimately, ethics is a dialogue between the wisdom in the principles and the moral meaning in the circumstances. And sometimes those circumstances, good to tell the truth, but not when the Nazis are asking where Anne Frank is. That's no time for truth. There's another principle operating then, and you go for it. And sometimes, even though I'm not mathematically inclined, I've used a formula and found it very successful. And one of the exam questions for my students last semester was comment and explain on H plus A equals A. They got it. The H is hyperfertility. Hyperfertility, add to that affluence, which everyone wants. Everyone wants to live the good life. Add affluence to add to that. The next day is appetite. The more affluent we get, the more we want. Equals apocalypse. Can't do it. Can't sustain it. And with that little formula, I think every student, of 65 students I had this past semester, they aced it. And I give the credit to that architectonic using formula. The second word that I say is key in teaching ethics is stories, cases. You know, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, I think, as an Irishman, that a story is worth 1,000 pictures. And I'd like to begin a student, especially if we're going to do something very abstruse and abstract and theoretical in class, grab them with a student. Remember, they just came from a class in statistics. They just came from a class in biology. They're not just sitting there panting for your first words. But you give a story, you've got them. And also you've got them engaged in the moral question. And that's what we're after. One of the dangers, of course, of the stories, useful as they are, necessary, even stories from your own life, is the students often remember the story and forget the theoretical point. So what you have to do is make sure in the exam you just don't get the story back and not what it was illustrating. A final thing I would suggest, find very useful if you can fit it into your schedule, is to have debates. I have 1 or 2 debates. Students volunteer, pick names out of hats. There's more volunteers than we could do it. We have 4 students debate, 2 on each side of a question. Give them a multiple set of possible debate subjects. Ask them for more. They take them very seriously. It may, in fact, hurt you as a teacher to realize they're paying more attention to the debate than they ever paid to you. You might run into that. But it's a wonderful teaching moment. They take it very seriously. Sometimes they dress a little more formally. They ask if they can invite friends in. So it becomes a little event. And the debaters go at it. I don't make it too formal. Each debater of the 4 has 3 or 4 minutes to present their case, use any technique that they wish to use to present it, give out handouts, whatever. And then they go back at one another after they've all had their say. And by that time, the class is always bursting in on it. And it's very lively. Sometimes the bell rings at the end of a debate, and I have to tell them, you really have to go. So teaching ethics is a joy. It's up to us to make sure it is. Otherwise, they just don't learn.